If I say the Sicilian defense, how does that make you feel? Most chess players that I know would feel either fear or excitement, or maybe a mixture of the two. It is a vast opening family, not just one opening, that has been heavily theorized by greats including Kasparov and Fischer. A lot of club level players and lower spend a lot of time trying to avoid the Sicilian because of the amount of theory that is involved. They'll play a different defense against e4, or if playing e4 themselves, they'll choose a sideline against c5, like the Boldler attack or the Grand Prix or something like that. There's then also the issue of which mainline Sicilian do you adopt. You could play a dragon or an accelerated dragon. You could play the Taimanov or the Khan or the Four Knights. You could play the classical, the Sveshnikov, the Kalashnikov. So if I then say to you the Najdorf, well, now we've just raised the bar. The Najdorf is one of the best defences at Black's disposal against e4. It is a top tier Grandmaster opening. So when my coach said to me, Anthony, you should learn the Najdorf, well, I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. I'm going to attempt to learn this wonderful, rich opening and record myself doing it. So if you like, you can watch and learn along with me. This exploration of the Najdorf will take place over a video series of several parts. I did consider making one mega video about this huge subject, but thought it would be better to break it down so that it's easier to digest, understand, and ultimately learn. I'm also not going to be covering the various sidelines at White's disposal. We're just going to look at the Najdorf proper, but I hope to make a follow-up series about Sicilian sidelines so we can learn those after we've covered this main topic. I'd like to start by showing you one of my favourite games in the opening because I think it's really good to begin with inspiration, and then the rest of this video will focus on the breadth of variations that we need to look at in future videos, and future videos will then go into those in depth. I've chosen a game by the great Mikhail Tal. His opponent is Josef Kupper. I think I've pronounced that correctly. Let me know if I'm wrong. And this game was played in Zurich in 1959. And I like this game because it's a fighting Najdorf. There are mistakes and inaccuracies for both sides. It shows some of the key ideas for either colour and ultimately results in a black win, which is great for our inspiration. So with the white pieces, Kupper opens with the move e4 and Tal responds with the Sicilian defense c5. We'll get into the details of the opening moves and why they're played after this, but we see the mainline open Sicilian with knight to f3. We have d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and knight to f6, just ganging up on this currently undefended pawn on e4. So it's defended with the move knight to c3. And here we see the move a6, and this is the move that signifies the start of the Najdorf. And again, we'll look at why this move is played later on. White responds with one of the most aggressive tries against this opening and plays the move bishop to g5. Definitely a main line that we need to consider. Black plays the standard move e6, just adding a defender to the critical d5 square. We'll talk about why that's critical later as well. And yes, you are, pinning this knight to the queen, but you can easily break it with bishop e7 or further support this knight with knight b to d7, something like this. But white decides to get on with things, be aggressive, and plays the move f4, just saying, well, I might try and crack you with e5 or maybe f5 depending on the situation, and I want to try and checkmate you. Black responds aggressively in turn. This is Mikhail Tal we're talking about after all, and Tal plays the move b5. And the engine gives this as a mistake in this position, slightly premature. It preferred playing a move like knight b to d7 or maybe bishop e7. But here, the move b5 is thematic in not just the Najdorf, but the Sicilian in general. You're looking to play b4 to kick this knight and potentially undermine this pawn on e4. So, if you can break the pin and maybe attack that pawn again with bishop to b7, that it might fall in some variations. And it's a good idea when this pawn, the f pawn, has flown forwards so it can't come to f3 to support that central e4 pawn. White plays the move queen to f3. I don't really like this move because it puts the queen right in the firing line of tiles next, which is bishop to b7, getting on this long diagonal like so. And here we see the move bishop to d3. So the engine again gives this as an error. White is just bringing the bishop to further defend this potentially weak point on e4, but it's not the best in the position. Instead, the engine prefers to play the move f5 here, just getting on with things and trying to crack open black's position. So maybe bishop d3 is just a bit passive, and it keeps this queen in this firing line. We see bishop e7, so breaking the pin on the f6 knight, and white goes long castle. So going queenside, this is one of the key ideas I was talking about. Often in the Sicilian, not just the Najdorf, you get opposite side castles, and you get black trying to play on the queen side and white trying to play on the king side. Tal plays queen to b6. Again, a slightly inaccurate move. The engine preferred just developing with knight b to d7. But, you know, potentially you're attacking this undefended knight on d4. So white is defending it indirectly and actually just plays the move rook h to e1. You can't take the knight because if you take on d4, there's the discovered check. Bishop takes b5 with check, and you lose the queen. So rook h e1 is, you know, a developing move and just brings more firepower in line with the king, and you don't need to worry about the knight on d4. Black plays the move knight b to d7, and now white decides to defend that knight on d4 with knight c to e2. One thing about the move knight b to d7 is that the c5 square is a very nice square for the knight. Often in the Sicilian, it's a good place for that to go to. So Tal wastes no more time by putting a knight on c5. And here, white decides it's time to make some exchanges and plays bishop takes f6. And you can see that the engine doesn't like this move. It kind of gives up pressure that white is putting on black. So it's not the best. And after the recapture, we see the move g4. And this was the idea behind taking on f6. White wants to be able to put loads of pressure using these pawns on the king side like so. We are then met with knight to a4. So black is trying to put pieces around white's king. And if you're playing Mikhail Tal and he starts doing that, you probably want to be a little bit scared. Again, the engine doesn't like it, but fair enough. Maybe there is enough firepower on this knight and it could potentially be won at some point, although you still have the bishop b5 check trick, so you can't take it straight away. However, white decides to just defend it and plays the move c3. Black continues to try and crack at the white's king position with b4, and you can see that it's a dead equal game. As I said, mistakes from both sides, and we've got an even position. But if you look at this open c file, you look at this advanced pawn, the queen here, you know, the knight is in the game. I would much rather have black in this position. I feel like practically white has got more potential to go wrong here. And they do. Their next move is not a mistake. It's actually a decent move. They play bishop to c2. So maybe blocking the c file and just adding extra defenders to the knight on d4. But here we see the best move according to the engine and a sacrifice from Tal. What else are we going to get from him? Knight takes b2, just giving up a knight to open up the king's position further. The engine doesn't flinch, but I bet that Kupper did. He took the knight on b2. Then we have b takes c3 check, so further flushing out the king. Obviously, you can't step back because the queen would come in with checkmate. So king takes on c3. And here we get a cold-blooded move from Tal. He simply castles. And this is an inaccuracy according to the engine. It says actually what you should play here is maybe rook to c8 check, but it is just dead equal. The king is probably running away. And if you play the best moves, this is a draw. But we're not engines, we're humans. Even Tal and his opponent are humans. So they're going to fight and someone will make an error. Tal decides to castle so he can get his other rook involved if he needs to and gets his king out of the middle. We see the move rook to b1, so attacking the queen. But here you can see that white is starting to go wrong. they're playing reactively. They're trying to defend against threats that aren't necessarily there by putting pressure on the queen like so. And actually what they should do is just get on with things and press their attack on the king side. We see queen a5 check. Again, not the best move. As you see, the engine drops to equal again. Better was the move bishop takes on d4 with check, and after knight takes like so, we get rook a to c8, and when the king steps over, the simple queen to c7. And this battery on the c file is looking pretty juicy, and black is for choice here. Anyway, after rook b1, we saw queen to a5 check. The king has to step away. It goes to d3, and we get the move rook a to c8. Now you might think, well, maybe this bishop is hanging on b7, but actually if you take that bishop, then the queen picks up this rook here on e1, so it's not currently hanging. So white defends it with queen f2, and we get the move bishop to a8 to save the bishop. Now here is where white makes the critical blunder. What they should do is just get on with things on the king side as before, but instead they played rook to b3, trying to defend against infiltration from black, but this just cost them the game because of the lovely little crunching move e5. And you're kicking away this knight, and as soon as you can clear that knight, you're going to be able to get at this king. So even if white captures, you recapture with a pawn and it still kicks this knight. So instead, they counterattack with g5, and after e takes d4, they didn't take back on f6. Let's just see what happens after this. Well, here, yeah, rook takes c2. Actually, that is really nice. Rook takes c2 like this, and if king takes, then you've got queen takes a2 check, and I mean, this is just curtains for the white king. I didn't look at that before I started recording this, so I hope you don't mind a little bit of my use of the engine. But let's just go back. After e takes d4, we've got knight takes d4, and now it's just completely winning for black after the move bishop takes d4. And white resigned because if the queen takes the bishop, then this rook hangs over here. And if the king takes, well, now you just get queen c5 check and pick up on f2. I hope you enjoyed that game. I actually found it in a games collection on chessgames.com, a collection of great Najdorfs. So I will put a link to that collection in the description so you can check out some other brilliant examples of this opening. Let's now take a look at the opening few moves of the Sicilian and how we get into the Najdorf, and I will give you my current level of understanding of it. The point here is not to teach you everything about the Najdorf. I probably am the wrong person to be able to do that. The point here is to establish our baseline for us to then work off when we start looking at specific variations and start to learn more about the opening. White opens with the move e4. You can get a Sicilian via other move orders, like starting with knight f3 and then after c5 playing e4, for example. But it is an e4 defense, so we'll stick with that. And black plays the move c5. With this move, black is instantly saying that they're up for a fight. They want counter chances and a game of any result. And it's a double-edged sword because you can get some really nice wins with the black pieces, but just as equally, you can get crushed by white if they play energetically and well. So you get what you want when you play the Sicilian. But this first move is really interesting because it's a flank pawn, i.e. one that is not on one of the central two files. So it's not one of these two pawns, but it does control a square in the center of the board, namely the d4 square. The main idea behind it is that after white plays d4, you take that central pawn with your pawn from the flank, giving you a 2v1 central pawn majority. And this is important if you can consolidate and absorb any kind of attack and get yourself to an endgame, especially a king and pawn endgame. Black is often for choice in those situations because of this. This is an example of an imbalance. An imbalance is a significant difference between the setup and the structure of either side. So black hasn't just played symmetrically with the move e5, for example. They've, moved a pawn that's on a different file than the one that white moved. And if you want chances to win, there has to be some kind of imbalance in the position, at least theoretically. That's how I understand it. So we're going to look at the main line. There are obviously lots of different things that white can actually do here. You know, they could play like knight c3, they could play bishop c4, they could play d3, they could play f4, they could play d4 now. There's all kinds of different things. But these are what we call sidelines when we talk about the Sicilian, and the topic for a future video series. Here we're talking about the main line open Sicilian, which starts with knight to f3. And if we're going to get our Najdorf, we want to play the move d6. Other moves are available. You know, you can play knight c6, you can play g6, you can play e6. They all lead to different types of Sicilian, but the Najdorf starts with d6. And you get the moves d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, as we've seen in the tile game, attacking this undefended pawn, knight to c3 to defend it, and then a6, the start of the Najdorf. This is what we're aiming for. This is our mainline Sicilian weapon. Before we go any further with this, I'd just like to go back and talk about a couple of different move orders, because you might find that instead of knight f3, they go knight c3 here. And the best move is technically to play knight c6 in this position. However, if you play the Najdorf, it's better just to go for the move d6. And this is a line that Grandmaster Gawain Jones gave in his Coffee House chess book. He gave the move here of the immediate d4, and after takes and then queen takes, knight c6, the queen actually drops back to d2. This is an opening that Carlsen played, and it's supposed to be an anti-Najdorf weapon. So maybe something people might want to avoid, and therefore they would play after knight to c3. That's why they might play knight c6. But unfortunately, if you play knight c6, you might then get move ordered. You can play knight ge2 here, or knight to f3. Let's go with knight ge2. I believe this is called the chameleon variation of the Sicilian, because it's hiding what it really is. And if you carry on here with, say, the move g6, for example, just going, okay, well, I'm not getting a Najdorf, let's go for more of a dragon type setup. Well, now you could get move ordered with d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and you're no longer in a Najdorf. This pawn is back here. You haven't played d6, the knight is no longer here. You've played knight c6, and you've played g6 as well. So you've got an accelerated dragon, and you've been move order tricked out of your main line. So that's one reason why after the move knight to c3, I stick with the move d6. And if they want to play this way, as per Magnus Carlsen, then, well, thank you for the tempo. At my level, I'm more than happy to play against this. Anyway, let's go back to the Najdorf proper. I'm sure there are other move orders and things to be aware of, and maybe we'll investigate some of those later on, but that's kind of the main one that I wanted to mention now, something to be aware of for your second move choice. Let's go back through the moves again. So e4, c5, knight f3, the open Sicilian, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and then here knight to f6, knight c3 defending the pawn, and then we get the move a6. Now, you might think that this move represents a loss of time because you're not developing any of your minor pieces, you're not getting your king out of the middle, you're playing another pawn move where white has already got two very nicely developed knights, and they've got a strong pawn in the center of the board, so they have more space. So why would you spend a move with another pawn move rather than, say, you know, developing a piece or looking to get this bishop in the game with, say, e5 or, you know, bishop e7 or something like that? Well, it's because of the critical b5 square. Oftentimes, if we just go back, let's say you play e5, right? Well, here, d6 is now not able to be defended by another pawn, and this pawn is clamping down on the d5 square. So without a6 being included, well, a knight could easily jump into b5 to put pressure either on this pawn or maybe at some times on the c7 square. The best move in this position is actually to play bishop to b5 check. So that's another move, that the move a6. makes impossible, because then you could just take the bishop. So that's the reasoning behind playing a6. And there's a lot of Sicilians where a6 is played, like the Khan or the O'Kelly, where you play it on, I believe, move 2. So it is a very, very useful move. And black is going to uncoil over the next few moves and get their pieces into the game and be left with a rich, structural, imbalanced game where, as we've said, you can fight for a win. And the game is, you know, anyone's to win or lose, depending on who is the better player or who has better understanding of the positions that arise. So we go back, we play a6 to stop anything from ever landing on b5. But another idea behind a6 is this move b5, as we saw in the tile game. As I said, this could be very useful to get this pawn flying forwards, to dislodge this knight, to weaken this pawn. Maybe the bishop can come to this diagonal as well. And, you know, from b7, it can influence the d5 square, which we'll talk about in a second. So a6 is a very, very useful move. It's called the Najdorf because Miguel Najdorf, he's not the first to play it, but he played it a lot with this a6 move and really brought it into popularity. So Miguel Najdorf is the player that gives this opening its name. From here, there's a lot of different things that white can do. There's loads of options. They've got so many moves. Some of the main ones are mainly bishop moves, but there's also some pawn moves which we will look at. But I want to talk briefly about this pawn and this square, because one of the key ideas in the Najdorf, if allowed, is to play the move e5. So let's say white plays the move bishop to e3, which is known as the English attack, and is definitely one of the main lines we need to consider. Well, here you can play e5 and you kick this knight. The best place for the knight to go is knight to b3. And if we look at this now, you can see that with this pawn going forwards and the fact we've already given up our c pawn, there's no pawns on the e and c files that are able to support the square on d5. So why does black allow this outpost, this weakness in the center of the board, and also this backwards and potentially weak d6 pawn? Well, in return, you get nice control of the dark squares. And, you know, after f4, for example, you might be looking to potentially take and maybe get a knight on e5 or something like that. But also the fight revolves around this d5 square. So often black might want to try and push d5 themselves to get rid of both of these weaknesses, dislodge this pawn, and, you know, then I think it's a very, very equal game, or maybe even black is slightly better if they can get the move d5 in. And white, in turn, might be trying to put a piece in on this square. They want to be able to do it where, after putting a piece in on d5, if black recaptures, then they get to recapture with a piece, say, like a bishop from c4 can recapture here. They don't want to recapture with a pawn, because a pawn on d5 would just make it a dead square for everybody, and that is good for black. So putting a piece in on d5 is best for white if, say, they can replace one knight with another or put a bishop on that square, for example, and keep d6 backwards and keep the d file open. So d5 really, really is critical. Now, you might say, well, hang on a minute, if d5 is so critical, then why play bishop e3 at all? Well, that's absolutely fair enough. Why would you let them keep this knight defending this square? And actually, we've just seen a game where bishop b5 was played, and after e6, this is pinned, so the knight no longer influences d5. And that is why this is one of the top options for white, just trying to make d5 further under white's control. It's certainly one of the options. Another option is bishop to c4, the Fischer-Sozin attack, which we will look at, just putting another piece firing on this square. Again, you can play e6 and just kind of blunt anything coming onto that square, but you notice how black is slightly cramped. They have less space. So that's why this a6 and b5 idea is so critical, because the way that black is able to gain space is on the queen side. And if we end up with opposite side castles, so white going long and black going short, then black's operations will be on that side of the board with this open c file, with this pawn flying forwards, with the queen on c7 or somewhere on this diagonal or on this c file, and a rook coming in to join it, and a knight jumping in, as we saw. This is where black really wants to get going. But in the meantime, white is going to try and get going either on the king's side or in the center. If they can get e5 in and crack at black's position, they're probably doing very well. And also the idea of f4, f5 with this bishop here firing down this way is, very important. And also you have to watch out for sacrificial ideas where, say, a knight kind of takes the pawn, or the bishop takes the pawn like this. So for example, if you were to play knight b to d7, sorry, just played e6. Let's give white a move. So let's say the move a4, so just playing against b5. If you now play knight b to d7 like this, well, it gives castles. But just to show the idea, and this probably isn't engine correct right now, there are sometimes ideas of taking this pawn, and then after the recapture, you take here, attacking the queen. And sometimes this pawn is also undefended. Say the bishop has come to e7, but the black king is absolutely destroyed. So you need to watch out for this kind of idea as well. One other idea that I just wanted to mention in this opening, is one that I already kind of know about, is the move h5. So one of the things that white could do is they could play a move like h3, or they could play f3, or they could play bishop e2 with a similar idea. So let's say that they play h3. So this is called the Adams attack. Well, the idea of h3 is to enable the move g4. You can't obviously play g4 here because, take it with the bishop and, you attack the queen, and maybe it's a pawn sacrifice and, you get some activity, but no one would do that. h3 enables this g4 move so that white can get on with things on the king side. And in this particular line, again, you can play e5 and kick this knight. It actually says the best place for this knight to go is knight d to e2, so over here rather than b3, and we'll look at the specifics of this in a bit. But here, the idea I wanted to mention is the idea of playing h5, and this just plays against the move g4. It kind of plays prophylactically against what white is trying to do, and the engine says it wants g3, and you kind of carry on the game with the bishop coming out this way, exerting pressure down here. But at the same time, black starts going on the queen side with b5. But this h5 idea comes up a lot, especially in lines where white is trying to play a very, very quick g4. So it's a nice little prophylactic move. And we need to look at the particulars of it. Let's say after bishop e7, like whether black actually wants to castle over this way once they've played this move, because this rook is nice behind this pawn and you might want to push it forwards, for example, especially if a knight comes over here. And that is another reason of playing h5 after knight to e2. If the knight then comes here, you can kick it away like this. So that's another interesting motif that is definitely good to know. And the last one that I wanted to mention was, well, what if after e5 they bring the knight into the seemingly quite nice f5 square? Well, here, this allows black to consolidate in the center, because after this move, it's a mistake, and black can just simply play the move d5. And this is a move that black is trying to play. As I said, they're trying to get rid of the weakness on d6 and the weakness on d5 in one move. And you can't take with the pawn because the bishop would take on f5. The best move here is to play bishop g5 to pin this knight, after which you just push the pawn, and suddenly you don't have any issues with your d6 pawn or even really your d5 square. So that's why knight f5 is not really possible. If we go back, if you look here, knight to d2, well here if you push, well you can just take this pawn because there's no knight on f5 to be taken by the bishop. So that is one interesting little motif to be aware of as well, because it comes up in another variation where it is applicable that you can play knight f5. So let's say instead we have bishop to g5. Well, here in the tile game we saw e6, right? Tile didn't play e5 here, and it's not one of the top 3 engine moves. It's the 4th move according to the Masters database, although that's 0% of the time, so it's not really played. If you play this move now, well, now the best move is to play the knight into f5. The reason is this bishop pins the knight against the queen. So if you were to play this move, well, then white could just take it. So d5, and you got knight takes d5, and white is just much, much better here. And if you take with the bishop, well, now you've given up your bishop pair, and by giving up the light square bishop, then d5 is actually weaker because it's a light square. But after bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, here knight d5 occupies that square to begin with, and after queen d8, sorry, you can take this, and the queen defends the knight. This is very, very nicely placed. Maybe c4 could be played. I mean, this is plus 1.5 and much better for white. So there are some nuances based on when you should play e5 and when you shouldn't play e5, usually based on the d5 square and whether the knight can come to f5 or not. So that's like an overview of everything that I really know about the Najdorf at the moment. And I'm hoping to develop this understanding and learn more about it as we go, so that we can speak about it with much more knowledge once this series is over. One other thing that I really do want to try and get to grips with, actually, just to mention it, is if we go back. So let's go back to bishop e3, e5, knight b3. Well, here the engine says the best move is bishop to e7. The master's database says the best move is bishop to e6. Sometimes you might want to play b5 or maybe even b6 and bishop to b7. And I find it quite complicated to understand which bishop move is correct in which situation. When do we go for a bishop on b7 firing on the long diagonal? Maybe that's after f4, as we saw in the tile game. That might be an interesting rule to look at. When do we go for bishop e6 first? Because obviously that helps to defend d5, so maybe that's important. Or when do we just play bishop e7, potentially looking to get our king safer and out of the center? That's definitely a question that we need to answer. So what are the main moves at white's disposal in this position after a6? Well, the first few are bishop moves. So let's start with the dark square bishop. The bishop could go to e3, the English attack. It could also go to g5, as we saw in the tile game. This is definitely one of the most aggressive tries and something we need to prepare for. And other than that, there's then this light square bishop. So the bishop could go to e2. It could go to c4, which is the Fischer-Sozin attack. And then you've got pawn moves. So h3 is the Adams attack. You've got f3. So this is another way of getting into the English attack again after bishop e3, potentially. And then you've got the move f4. So just getting even more aggressive and just getting this pawn flying forwards. But one thing about f4 is it's not able to support the e4 pawn. So maybe it's one step too far, but this is definitely a move. It's called the Amsterdam variation, according to Lichess. What else do you have? Let's just have a look at the masters here. So you've also got the move g3, so the Fianchetto variation. We've also got the move a4, so just immediately preventing b5, like so. You've also got the move bishop to d3 as well. So here, this is interesting because, I mean, I said before you might play knight c6 because this knight is potentially undefended, and then it forces something from that knight, but it's not given as one of the top engine moves, so we'd have to come back to this and have a look and see what's best here. And you've also got knight to b3 straight away. Now this one I find quite interesting because, as we've said, a lot of the time black wants to play e5 to kick this knight away from d4. But by playing knight b3 straight away, you kind of say to black, well, there's no knight on d4 for you to kick. So are you going to go ahead and play e5? Does it have much of a point? You just weaken this square. So what are you doing? And white is, 2 pieces ahead of 1 in development. So even if black just continues to develop, then, white continues to develop and stays ahead. So I actually quite like this move. I think it's quite a nice idea from white, although the engine gives it as completely equal. And other than that, the other move given by the Masters database is the move rook to g1. So this is just very route 1. It's saying I'm playing g4, I'm going to attack you on the g file, and that just signals that this king is going to have to go long or stay in the center. So this is definitely interesting, and we'll have to see what we want to play against that. let's start with bishop e3, the English, and I'm not going to go into detail now. I'm just going to show a couple of moves, how we want to respond to these initial tries from white before we get into the theory of each of these in future videos as we go. Generally, as a rule, if you're able to play e5, then you should play it. And after bishop e3, you are able to do that. So e5 is the move. And here, the top move is to play knight to b3. Although white could also just play what I call the slow and boring way, which is to bring the knight back to f3. I've played this a couple of times myself. It's quite interesting. But one of the reasons why the knight goes to b3 is because you're actually looking to bring it round to be able to support a knight coming to d5. How could it do that? Well, you might be able to go here and then here and then here, and then it supports d5. So that's why on b3, the knight is technically better than on f3. So then here we have a bit of a crossroads. The top move, according to the Masters database, is bishop to e6. So putting a bishop to defend the square on d5. But the top move, according to the engine currently, is bishop to e7. So again, which bishop move do we play? Well, bishop e7 is the second top move according to the Masters. But the difference between the two is, bishop e6 is 85% played. Bishop e7 is 15%. So I think here we should stick with what the Masters says and consider that this weakness on d5 needs extra support. b5 seems a little bit premature at this point, and I don't think I'd go in for that. So bishop e6 is the move that I think we're going to play. And, white could go a couple of different ways here. They could play queen to d2, just quickly looking to castle long. And here there's no reason why you shouldn't just develop. And then, they play f3 to support this point. But then at this point, we can play our move h5 and just clamp down on this g4 move. And I think that's as far as I'm going to take this particular variation for this video. This is a position we definitely need to look at a lot more, because if we go back, instead of queen to d2, they could actually just start with f3 here. And in this position, we can play h5 straight away with the same idea. It would transpose after queen to e2, although they have other ideas like bishop to e2 to further support a g4 push potentially. But this is the kind of setup we're going for against the English attack. And we need to, work out, do we play b5? When do we play it? If so, how do we engineer d5 if we're trying to play it? Where does the queen best belong? Does it go on c7? Does it go, well, it can't go to either a5 or b6 at the moment because of these pieces. So maybe c7 is good. Are we going bishop e7? Are we castling? Are we playing knight b to d7? Or are we going to c6? On d7, the knight could potentially come to b6 to further support the d5 square. So these are all the kind of questions we will investigate in our future video on the English attack. Let's go back. Let's go to, instead of bishop e3, let's go to bishop to g5. And here in the tile game, we saw the move e6. However, I think I'd like to go a slightly different route with this, because e6 is the main line. And there's a lot of theory involved in this particular variation. Now, at a certain level, you don't need to learn all the theory. You just need plans and ideas, and you play your opponent, right? But as you get higher and higher up the chess ladder, theory becomes more and more important. And this line, I know, has got a lot of theory. It could lead to a poison pawn variation where the queen comes over here and snaps this pawn over there. But, MVL, that's Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who is one of the leading experts in this opening, I saw him play this poison pawn variation against Caruana a couple of times, and he got crushed. So I don't know if I want to go in for anything that's quite that sharp. Here, I think I'd rather go for the move knight b to d7. And this is an idea I saw in a book about the Najdorf by the brothers Jonkas, I believe it is, Djonkas. I think that's how it's spelt and pronounced. Correct me if I'm wrong. But you just support the knight on f6 with a knight on d7. It helps you get another piece potentially into the game. And, the game carries on from there. So this is the move that I want to play against bishop to g5 and what I'm going to focus this repertoire on. If you prefer looking at e6 and going into poison pawn variations, that is up to you. But I like this as a better practical choice for someone at club level and, lower my particular chess level. So again, I need to see what the development scheme is from here, whether we play this pawn forwards either to e6 or e5, or maybe we fianchetto the bishop this way potentially. Where does the king, best belong? Probably king side over here. Where does the queen best belong? Again, is it c7, or here it has the option of b6 or a5? We'd have to look at how to develop from this point onwards. Let's go back. The next move that we had was bishop to c4. This is not one of the top moves according to the masters these days. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th on the list, and it's not in the top 3 engine lines. This used to be very popular because Bobby Fischer used to play this all the time. That's why it's called the Fischer-Sozin attack. But it has, I think, fallen in repute at top level. Doesn't mean it's not playable though, because we're not playing at top level. And here the right move is to play the move e6. You just stop this bishop from hitting f7, and you kind of say, well, what is your bishop doing here on this diagonal, biting on these two pawns? You do need to watch out for these kind of sacrifice type of ideas that I've already mentioned. This bishop is actually also undefended at the moment, so the best move now is to play bishop to b3 to go back, although there is also castles as well. There's also bishop b3 here, but bishop b3 is, the top played move. The top engine move is actually also a4, just to stop b5 from hitting the bishop. But bishop b3 gets the bishop out of the range of b5 and out of the range of a queen, maybe coming to c7 to tap this piece up like this. So after this move, well, here we've got a couple of options. We could play b5, that's the top master move and the second engine move currently. We could play knight to d7, but the percentages between them, we've got 47% have played b5 at master level, 35 have played knight b to d7. So we'd have to have a look at each and maybe look at some master games to see which one we prefer and make our choice. Let's go back. Instead of bishop to c4, let's look at bishop to e2. So I always see any opening where bishop e2 is played as kind of the classical version of what's going on. This is apparently called the Opusensky variation. And I believe Opusensky may have been one of the first people to actually play this way with a6 before Miguel Najdorf really took up the mantle. So it'd be worth learning a bit more about the history of the opening as well. But this move puts an extra piece on this g4 square. You might be looking to play g4. So I'm thinking h5 might be an idea. It's not presented as one of the top options. And actually, this move doesn't stop you playing e5. So e5 here. Again, we have a choice between knight to f3, which is, second best, and knight b3, which is best. And here the top clear move is bishop to e7. So why not bishop to e6? So this is an interesting question. It is the second top move according to the masters, but that's only been played 6% of the time, whereas bishop e7 is played 94% of the time. And maybe it's because black is waiting to see what white does with, maybe this pawn. Maybe they want to play b5 and put the bishop on this diagonal, because if you're looking to play this move, then this diagonal is also going to open. So maybe you wait with this bishop to see what white is doing. g4 is the best move here. Let's just go back one move. h5 is not in the top 3 engine moves, and it's not in any of the masters moves. So I don't think this move is very good. Let's just put it on the board and have a look, because you give up this pin and then the knight is coming into d5 like this. So I don't think we want to play it that way. So bishop e7 is clearly the move. We decide what we're doing with this bishop later. White's best move is castles, and again we'll have to look from this point onwards. Okay, so instead of bishop to e2, well, now we've got, well, f3 we've kind of already covered because it does sort of transpose into the English attack. You can play e5 here, and after knight to b3, you've got bishop e6, and then bishop e3. I think this is just a direct transposition with h5. So we'll look at that in the English attack video. Instead of f3, you've got h3, the Adams attack. Mickey Adams, England's #1, one of my favourite players of all time. He plays h3, and here you can play e5. You can play this move because, as I said, why e5? Because they can't go to f5, because you can then play d5 because there's no pin on this knight, so it's helping with the move d5. So you kick this knight away, so it goes back to a less advanced square. Here, actually, the best move is to play knight to d2. It's definitely the top move, according to both Engine and the Masters, rather than knight to b3. So knight to d2, and again, we have the move h5, so playing against this g4 idea. So I like this. This is what we're going to go for against the Adams. And what else were we left with then? So after, instead of, sorry, h3, well, then we've got f4. So this is a very aggressive try, f4. And the Engine and the Masters are both telling me that you can just get on with it and play e5 anyway. So if we're allowed to do that, let's keep things consistent. Let's play e5. And it says knight f3 is best here, definitely the top move. Why not knight to b3? Well, you know, that's still fine. After knight to b3, then you can just develop a piece, or, you know, you can develop this piece and look to castle. So that's all right. But it says knight f3 is best in this position. So again, we'd have to understand the nuances of why these things are best when there's not actually that much between them. And here the move knight b to d7 looks good. There's also queen c7. I don't know about knight b to d7 here, because I like the fact that this bishop is firing this way. So maybe we need to look at the differences between this move and this move. Although knight b to d7 is 81% according to the Masters, so we'd have to have a look at that. Let's put that on the board as an option, and then let's also put queen to c7 on the board as an option as well. Okay, so instead of f4, we had g3. So this is your fianchetto variation. Again, you play e5. Here, there's a clear division between knight to d2, which is the best move. I guess this helps to support the move f4, which is why it goes there, especially because this bishop is coming out this way. So you're not blocking the bishop by putting the knight on d2. There is also knight to b3 is another top move here, after which you would play bishop e7. Bishop e6 is the top engine move. So again, it's like, which one do we go for? Well, the Masters play bishop e7, and after bishop to g2, well, then you just castle. So you're just getting yourself out of the way, getting castled, and then you can decide what you're doing with these pieces. So actually, I quite like that approach against this slightly slower fianchetto variation. At least it seems slower to me at this stage. So instead of knight b3, what about knight to e2, knight d to e2? Well, again, bishop e7, although knight d7 is also up there, but bishop e7, keep it consistent, bishop g2 and castle. So the same thing against both knight moves, and we'll work it out from that point. Okay, so that was g3. Then we've got a4. So a4 basically says you're not playing b5, but it doesn't stop e5. So again, we play e5. Here, the best move is to play knight to f3, although there's also knight b3. So again, knight f3. Let's just quickly look at knight b3. After knight b3, well, this time there's a clear division. It's the top two engine moves and the top two Masters moves between both bishop e7, bishop e6 and bishop e7. So I'd like to look at each of those moves and game examples and see which one we prefer. Instead, there's knight f3, and here bishop e7 is clearly the best move. Queen c7 is also an option, but let's keep it consistent. Bishop e7, and you've got bishop g5, and then it wants to get the other bishop out to, you know, guard the d5 square. You're taking here, and then maybe allowing knight d5. Yeah, knight comes into d5, but you just play knight to d7. So that seems like an interesting line. Maybe there's some improvements we can look at. Bishop c4, rook c8. So I'm going quite deep into this one because it's piqued my interest. The bishop tucks itself away over on b2. And, oh, we're looking just to exchange that knight by playing knight to b6. That's a nice idea. I like that idea. And it says it just takes, and after takes and takes, here you play this move, and it's an equal game. So that was a bit of a longer line, but that's because that's actually not one I've ever really looked at before. So I've just put that on the board after the move a4, so we could get a bit of a sense of what we're trying to do. Interestingly, we're playing actively with the same sort of ideas against d5, the open c file. So I quite like that line. That was an interesting line. Okay, let's go back. Other than a4, Then we had bishop to d3. So knight c6 instantly sprang to mind because of the other line we looked at previously in the video. But here, the engine actually likes to move g6. The masters prefer the move e5, though there's not much in it. And the engine gives e5 as a similar or same evaluation. So let's keep it consistent. Let's play e5. Knight b3, knight to e2, both, similar ideas here. Knight to e2 is better. I think that's actually because the bishop is already outside of this square. So you don't also have to play g3 to get it out if there's a knight on e2. The knight isn't blocking the bishop in. So this does make sense to me. And maybe you're looking to further support f4. So that would make sense. But, obviously knight b3 is kind of the standard move. So we'd have to consider that. After which bishop e7. And then you've got mutual castle. So you just then choose what you do with these pieces and play chess, right? So if we go back to knight to d2 e2, well, here now you've got bishop e7 is the top master's move. Knight c6 is the top engine move, but it's the same evaluation. So let's again keep it consistent. Bishop to e7 and mutual castles, and we play on from here. Okay, so that was bishop d3, and there's a couple of other moves. The interesting knight to b3 that I mentioned before. So interestingly here, e5 is played by the masters 9% of the time, but that is 5th in the list. Instead, they play e6 46% of the time, and that is the top engine move. And e6 does make sense to me because you're taking away the d5 square from a piece. You're enabling this bishop to come out so you can castle. Maybe this guy is going to go this way by playing b5 like that. So, wow, the top move here is actually to play the move g4. Now that you've taken away one of the attackers of that square. So that is aggressive. And b5, just get on with it. Wow, look at that. So this looked cool. I'm definitely down for some of this. And, there's g5 to consider, after which you counterattack with b4. Or there's bishop to g2 as well, after which bishop to b7. So this looks sharp. This looks really, really interesting to me. And actually, I'm kind of interested in maybe playing this way with the white pieces as well. When I play against the Najdorf, I tend to play bishop to e7 lines and look for g4 that way. Well, I've also played the h3 Adams attack kind of lines, but I quite like this. This is interesting and different. So maybe this will be my line with both colours. Now, the only other one, I believe, was rook to g1. And yes, there probably are other moves that you could play. I don't know if you can do something like this or, other stuff with the queen, maybe. I have no idea. I mean, I don't like this move because of obviously bishop here. Seems interesting. But maybe there's other moves. But the only other one that the Masters database gives us is rook to g1. So we will also take a look at this. And here you can play e5, so play e5. Knight b3 is clearly best. And h5 is third top engine move, second top master's move. You can also play bishop to e6. But the engine evaluation is the same. And actually, I like this idea because, again, it's kind of consistent. Trying to play against the move g4 by playing this h5 move. And it says that, white should play h3 to try and continue to get this in, whereupon you further clamp. So if this, you can take en passant potentially. So I like this way of playing against rook g1. It's like if you're going to just signal that you're going to go this way, then I'm going to do whatever I can to stop you. So those are the lines that we need to learn, that we need to study in our future videos. I might make one video on each of the main lines and then videos on some of the kind of lesser lines together. We'll see how that pans out. That is our initial look at the Najdorf. We now have our start point from which we can learn and develop our Sicilian Najdorf repertoire. The next video in this series will pick up with some of the main lines, and over the course of several videos, we will build a rounded repertoire that we can start to employ in our games. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then please do consider a subscribe to the channel and there are some other ways that you can support me in the description below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you again next time.